The Catholic monarchs, two of the most influential people in all of Spanish history, who completely changed Spanish culture and beliefs. They brought great fortune and wealth to their country, and they killed and banished millions. Ferdinand and Isabella ruled Spain from 1475 to 1504, and during that time they paved the way for Spain to become a single unified nation. They sponsored many ventures, such as the Spanish Inquisition and the Columbus expeditions. Their largest venture, however, was the Siege of Granada. This ending to a 700-year war completely changed the course of religion in Spain, turning it into an almost purely Catholic state and removing the Muslims and Jews by deadly force. April 22nd, 1451. Isabella of Castile is born to Isabella I of Portugal and John II of Castile, as second in line to the throne of Castile. After her father died, her half-brother Henry IV ascended to the throne, and in 1462 had a child, Juana, with his second wife. Henry's opposition, however, claimed that this child was not his real heir. These nobles tried to force Henry into naming Isabella's younger brother, Alfonso, as his heir, which he did after a long and bloody battle. This victory was short-lived, however, as Alfonso died in July 1468 of the plague, although some suspect poisoning, and Isabella was subsequently named the new heir, under the terms that Henry must approve of whomever Isabella married. In 1469, Isabella married her second cousin, Ferdinand of Aragon, with correct legal papers thanks to Cardinal Roderick Borgia, later Pope Alexander VI, but in doing so went behind Henry's back, causing him to revoke her status as heir to the throne. When Henry died in 1474, the War of the Castilian Succession ensued, with Alfonso V of Portugal, Juana's husband, supporting Juana's claims, and Ferdinand supporting Isabella's claim. The war was settled in 1479, with Isabella being named as Queen of Castile. By this time, Ferdinand had also ascended to the throne of Aragon. In this time, Spain was divided into four kingdoms, two larger ones, Castile-Leon and Aragon, and two smaller kingdoms, Catalonia and Valencia. Because of the comparative power of the two larger kingdoms, when the monarchs were married, all of Spain was symbolically unified. However, they were not officially, and more importantly, papally, the same political entity until the reign of their grandson, King Carlos V, 50 years later. Starting in 756 CE, the Catholics in Spain began to push back against the Islamic Umayyad Caliphate. There was very little progress made before 940 CE, however. After the fall of this caliphate, an instatement of the Arab Empire began, due to the caliph's poor tax policy and the consequential financial instability. By the beginning of Ferdinand and Isabella's reign, almost all of the Muslims, now broken into tribes, had been pushed out of Spain, except for the Moors, who still controlled some of the lands in the south around the city of Granada, and the Reconquista, or the Reconquest, had slowed. However, Ferdinand and Isabella restarted it as the Granada War in an attempt to finally force the Moors from Spain. One of Ferdinand and Isabella's main goals was to unify Spain and purge it of Jews and Muslims. This is the reason they were called the Catholic monarchs. They found it their responsibility to reunite Spain as a Catholic state. Until 1482, integration and lack of motivation had stalled the invasion, and there were alternating times of war and peace. The last 10-year crusade finally pushed Muslims to Christianity. There was another interesting reason behind the Reconquista.
It seems like many people during this age believed that the world was coming to an end. So they said, well, we will conquer Granada, we'll conquer North Africa, and then we'll conquer Italy, and then we'll... southern Italy, well, it's unrelated, vaguely related, and then we'll conquer Jerusalem. And then when we conquer Jerusalem, that will be the beginning of the end of the world. So this was part of this drive to fight against Islam, but not because I didn't like Islam, in part, but also to a large extent because they wanted the world to end and to be there to see it and to be the instruments of the world's end.
Granada was the last city to fall to Catholicism. The siege began in 1491, the monarch's key to the city belonging to a young man named Boabdil. Boabdil had recently tried to take over the Granada area from his father, the Sultan, and so was expelled from the city. He was then converted by Ferdinand and Isabella and promised to help them in the war. He was promised beautiful land for his treason to Granada. However, he did not like the land he was given. Boabdil then turned on his former allies, going to Granada to fight the Catholic monarchs. It was too late at this point, however, and he was unable to get through. He desperately sought aid from other Muslim countries, but they were unable to help. So now he was fighting his enemies with people he had betrayed and was former enemies with. Granada was just a city in a mountain. It had no coastline. It was completely on its own. The city fell into a painful decay with both Muslims and Christians dying. And so finally, in 1492, Granada capitulated. The Reconquista was a very complicated series of events, and it set many precedents in war, essentially creating the concept of the religious war. Before the Reconquista and the Crusades, most wars were not fought over religions, or at least that was not the driving factor behind them. In fact, many wars were fought with Christians and Muslims on both sides, and were mostly for land, money, and conversely power. The Crusades and the Reconquista began a precedent of Christians attacking Muslims just because they were Muslim, and Muslims attacking Jews just because they were Jewish, and vice versa. In Spain, as the Catholics invaded Muslim enclaves, the Islamic peoples in these places were offered a choice: convert, leave, or die. Of course, many of the people offered this choice chose to convert, but their troubles were far from over.
Many Muslims had the choice of converting or leaving, or converting and being killed. And some of them converted. And then some of them converted sincerely, some of them converted less sincerely, some of them began practicing sort of Islamicized Christianity with some traditions going back to their Muslim past. Well, some converted very sincerely and became good Christians and even priests, but all of this population of converts and their descendants came under suspicion of Christians. So at some point they said, well, let's just expel all of those people, even though they're Christians, just because of their race, just because they had Muslim grandparents. So this way racism was born.
The Reconquista also closed one of the largest sources of knowledge that Europe had.
But throughout the Middle Ages, Spain was the place where interchange took place, and where much of the culture of the Middle East was transferred to Europe. Much of the knowledge and learning and things like that. Things like Arabic numerals. So they originated in India, then they moved to the Middle East, were discovered in the Middle East, then they were discovered by Muslims in Spain, and then Christians who were interacting with Muslims. So, well, that's great. It's so much easier than Roman numerals. It's so much better, so much easier for commerce and those things. So when this conduit was closed, well, Europe could no longer be enriched by any cultural exchange with the East.
For a long time, almost all knowledge came from the Middle East and traveled to Europe through the Granada region. The Middle East was long held as the cradle of civilization and was at the top of the charts when it came to scientific and mathematical discoveries. From 800 to 1100 CE, Baghdad was the meeting place for people of all religions to come together and learn. Now, while this learning declined in the 12th century, it still continued in other smaller pockets, one of them being the Iberian Peninsula. Until the Reconquista, that is. In the end, the Granada War was a morally terrible occurrence. It hurt the Muslim community of the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, killing or removing almost 500,000 Muslims from the area, and it created discrimination and hatred that can still be found in some Catholic sects, such as the Catholic anti-Islamic and anti-Semitic hate groups, the Fatima Crusader and Slaves of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, both of which cite the Catholic monarchs as an inspiration. Ferdinand and Isabella had a very bloody reign, involving the deaths of millions of not only Muslims in Granada, but also Jews in the Inquisition and Native Americans during the Columbus expeditions. They were part of and the end of one of the first religious wars in recorded history, and they cemented Spain's place as an almost fully Catholic nation. They spread the Catholic religion over much of the New World and brought Spain together as one symbolic country. Their legacy has lasted these 500 years in numerous ways. Spain is still its own country of mostly Catholics. In many areas, people are still persecuted for their race and religion, following the precedent set by these monarchs. And while it didn't start hatred between the three main monotheistic religions, it certainly strengthened this hatred and made a lasting impact on relations between the three.
So the Reconquista in Spain has a very nasty legacy. So the world would have been a better place if we didn't have that.